So can we forget about the 2016 Suicide Squad movie?
Yeah. Welcome back to Wordy and Nerdy. I'm Ren.
I'm John.
And today we are going to talk about the long-awaited sequel slash soft reboot slash soft remake, The Suicide Squad. Not to be confused with Suicide Squad. This is a whole new thing.
And this is going to be completely spoilers, so if you have not seen the movie yet...
You should go do it.
Yeah.
You should go watch it. Because we just came back from watching it for the second time. In the same week. We watched it Friday, and we came back and watched it again on Sunday, because it was that good. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. So obviously this movie was directed and written by James Gunn, who normies will recognize from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise in Marvel. He's done a lot of other films too, but like the ones that comic book nerds are going to recognize are Guardians of the Galaxy. And so this was a big deal. Like, we had known about this for a while, that he was going to take on a DC project. Apparently they had originally offered him like Superman or something, but he didn't really want to do that. He wanted to play around with some of the lesser known characters and the villain characters. So that's what he did. And basically they brought back the handful of good things from the original Suicide Squad from 2016, which would involve Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag, Viola Davis as Amanda Waller,
Yep.
and Jai Courtney as Boomerang. But not for long. So 4 remaining people. Everybody else is different in this film. They were just brought on a whole new cast of crew. They brought back they brought on Idris Elba to basically replace Will Smith's character,
Yep.
Deadshot, in the first movie. Because originally Will Smith was going to be in the sequel, and then there were scheduling conflicts, so he ended up approaching Idris about taking over a similar role. And he's basically just sort of a rebooted version of Deadshot, but his name in this is Bloodsport. Mm-hmm. And Idris Elba does an excellent job. We'll get into it, but he does a really good job. The acting was better than I expected it to be from people I didn't necessarily expect much from, including John Cena.
Yep.
I didn't know John Cena could actually act. I just kind of thought he was one of those, muscly former wrestler turned actor dudes like The Rock. Like, no offense to The Rock, but I feel like he plays one character ever. And so I don't really see him as having a lot of range, and so I kind of expected the same from John Cena. Even in the previews and stuff, it seemed like he was going to be very comic reliefy, and he is to some degree, and that's kind of as far as I thought it was going to go, but it didn't. I was pleasantly surprised. What were your thoughts on it?
I honestly believe this is probably the best DC Universe movie. This was phenomenal, and we're probably going to this more further. I think this movie is like beautiful shot.
Absolutely.
It's gorgeous and amazing. I believe the acting was top notch, and I actually cared about the squad, not like the first movie, where to me in the first movie they were just pretty much disposable characters that can be blown up.
And the thing is, they weren't, though. So, to recap a little bit for those who may or may not be familiar with the first Suicide Squad. So I was really excited when the first Suicide Squad came out. In fact, for the longest time, my background on the computer was a picture, like one of the promotional shots from it. Because it was going to be Harley Quinn, who's my favorite DC character. It was going to have the Joker, who I really like. And I heard that, there were going to be some interesting things, and Will Smith was in it. I was really pumped for it. And I went to see it with some friends back in 2016, and I think we enjoyed our evening well enough. There were good enough moments. Margot Robbie did a good job as Harley, but like overall, it just wasn't a super coherent story. And the Joker in it is just like a Hot Topic kid, like he's not, or some kind of gangster. Like he's not like Joker at all. Even though Jared Leto was doing all this weird shit to prepare for the role supposedly. And so, but the problem, a lot of people critique the original Suicide Squad movie, mostly because it was poorly edited and the story was not super coherent. And part of that was because of a lot of studio meddling. Like David Ayer, who was the director, had a certain vision for it. WB had a different vision. Or really, WB just wanted to copy whatever Marvel was doing because they wanted to be successful. So Marvel had recently, well, technically it was Marvel, but not the MCU, it was Fox that had released Deadpool, and that was like one of the first big ones that was rated R, which was a risk, but it ended up paying off, and a lot of people really liked Deadpool. So they ended up so that came out right before, and so it's like you can tell that the folks at WB were like, oh, let's see if we can copy that formula. So they started throwing in pop songs, pop culture references and crap, trying to piggyback off of Deadpool, but it ain't no Deadpool. Archaeologist named June Moon, who is such a good archaeologist that she takes an ancient statue and snaps it in half immediately and releases the witch's spirit, which it like poisons her or whatever, and she can control it. Amanda Waller can control it by stabbing its heart in a box or something, and June Moon fell in love with Rick Flag, who's her top colonel. I don't know how that happened off screen.
Yeah.
And so you have no investment in these characters, and there is no reason for the Suicide Squad to exist until there's a problem that Waller created by creating the Suicide Squad, because Enchantress goes rogue and starts doing crap, and it's like, well, that wouldn't have been a problem if you hadn't done this in the first place. So like, what was the goal here? And they don't do enough with it. But plus, the first Suicide Squad was rated PG-13, and so even though it's supposed to be the Suicide Squad, and even though it's supposed to have like stakes, there really aren't many stakes, because only 2 people die in the entire movie. 2 people.
For a movie called Suicide Squad, there's not a lot threatening. No, here villains die, nothing.
No, I mean, literally, there are 2 people who die, and like, I guess technically the Enchantress, but that's just the spirit is banished, because June Moon is still alive. But yeah, so it's like, there's no, like, the first one is a complete non-entity, because all the characters are introduced with these flashy sequences, except for Slipknot, and so of course he dies. And when they blow up his head, there's like no blood or anything, because it's PG-13, and then the only like major enemies they fight are these faceless zombies that they can kill without thinking twice about it, because again, no blood, because it's PG-13. So I think the whole premise of the Suicide Squad can kind of only work as an R-rated movie, which is exactly the mindset that James Gunn had going in. He's told WB, like, look, I'll direct it, but only if it's rated R. And they were hesitant at first, because that's a risk for them. They hadn't really released a rated R superhero film in the DCEU. But he was like, it's gonna have to be rated R if you want me to do this. And that was definitely the best move, I think.
I think we both absolutely love this one, that upcoming, and we all agree it benefit from being rated R, and James Gunn definitely was right. It needed to be rated R. It fits the comics perfectly. And just like in the first 5 minutes of this movie, it was automatically better than
literally
original.
From the first scene, it was better. And from the very first scene. And it's like, this is one of those movies, and I don't say this much, because I feel like these days, movies a lot of times are pretty mediocre, and even the ratings don't necessarily tell you anything. Like, I've seen plenty of rated R movies that didn't really use that to their advantage, or they did, but just gratuitously, to the point that I didn't really like it. Like, even Deadpool, I liked well enough, but I wasn't, like, crazy about all the gore. But the thing about this movie, like, even though it was quite gory, I loved it. I loved every second of it. I don't even know why the gore didn't bother me, other than the fact that it was just, like, for lack of a better term, shot so beautifully. Some of the goriest scenes in this movie are shot so perfectly. The cinematography is elite in this movie. Like, I can't even, like, there's a scene where King Shark, so the team that they have in this movie is, well, we'll get to that. But anyway, King Shark is a big shark man. If those of you who watch the Harley Quinn animated series know King Shark, he's a character in that. But in this character, he's voiced by Sylvester Stallone. There's a scene where he, like, rips a man in half. And you can see, like, blood and sinew, but it's shot so beautifully. I want it in, like, a poster. It's gorgeous. It's just the most gorgeous scenes. I mean, the most beautiful scene in the movie is toward the climax, which we'll get to. But it's very bloody and gory, and yet still some of the most wonderful cinematography I've ever seen. So, backing up a little bit. So the idea, like I said, she's reconfigured the Suicide Squad, but it's really completely different people, except for Harley Quinn and Boomerang. So the first crew, it's Harley Quinn and Boomerang, and then it's, they put a lot of random heroes, deep cut characters that only the most dedicated comic book nerds would know. Like TDK, the Detachment Kid, who in the comics, his name is actually Arm Fall Off Boy, fun fact. I'm not making that up. That is his name. And there's also Javelin, who's just a guy with a javelin, played by Flula Borg, who nerds like me might recognize from Pitch Perfect 2. He plays one of the villains in that one, the Germans. But anyway, and then there was
Pete Davidson.
Pete Davidson, gosh. And Pete Davidson was there as Blackguard. I think he's just a dude with a bunch of guns. The guy that Mongal, and who else?
Weasel,
yeah, who's just a weasel. He doesn't even talk or anything. He's just this creepy little man-like weasel thing.
We also have Michael Rooker playing a character with a bouncy ball.
Oh yeah. That was Savant. Yeah. Yeah, he's actually the very first character you see. And at first the movie setup kind of makes you think like he's going to be like the main character. But no, and he ends up so the first team, they go and they get sold out by Pete Davidson's character. Pete Davidson is actually the first human death. His face gets just blown clean off. I can't say I was upset. I was not looking forward to seeing Pete Davidson for a prolonged period of time. I'm sorry. And I just can't roll with it. So he got killed, and then they got like absolutely massacred by this army, and it's the most bloody, gory, horrific thing. Like, Mongal jumps on a helicopter and flies it in and catches a bunch of people on fire, and then it's like an engine explosion, and she's like on fire and screaming as she's dying, and then like Boomerang is like filled with shrapnel and like large pieces of wood just sticking out of his face, and then he gets run over by like a giant fire from the helicopter thing, and then like I said, Pete Davidson's face gets blown off. The detachment takes his arms, like he can telekinetically control his arms, so he like breaks off his arms and they start like smacking around.
I like how he was dying. They were shooting his arms instead
of the
like, body,
rolling and around on the floor like in agony because he could still feel the pain. Yeah, it was so funny. I like a lot of it's just so violent but so funny. And these people were just getting absolutely brutalized. And then the Savant character, the whole time he's like hiding behind a rock with Weasel, who died already when he fell out of the plane, at least supposedly, and drowned. And so he's like watching all of this happen. He's like, oh fuck this, and he tries to swim away, and Viola Davis, Amanda Waller says, like, you gotta turn back or you're gonna blow up your head, Chip, and he doesn't turn back, so she's like, damn it, and she blows his head up, and then his blood forms the Warner Brothers Presents, and it's like, and that's the opening scene of the movie.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that continues happening. He keeps using the atmosphere to like spell out title cards for the different scenes. I think he kind of broke it up into sections similar to the Snyder Cut, really, but much more organic. I will say one more thing about Boomerang before he, because like I said, he was one of the only people that was returned. He dies pretty soon in the movie, but they do at least give him some cool boomerangs this time. Yeah. Because last time he literally just had a boomerang and that was it. This time he's got these like special glowing hyper sharp boomerangs that can fly really far, and so he like throws one and it like slices one dude's neck and then slices in the top of another guy's head off, and it like slides off and you see brain, and it's like, oh my gosh, it was really dope. And I sound like a psychopath, but it really was so cool. And but then you find out that there was a whole other team, and they flash back and forth in time a little bit, but it's pretty clear where you're going. So the whole different team is being led by Idris Elba's character, Bloodsport, and that is the one featuring, let's see, so it's Bloodsport. It is the Ratcatcher 2, who's the daughter of Ratcatcher 1, another deep cut character. And let's see. And fun fact, Ratcatcher 1 is dead at this point, but in flashbacks we see he's played by Taika Waititi, who has a great line later, which we'll talk about. But so it's Ratcatcher 2, his daughter, and she can control rats with a special little beacon thing. We've got John Cena as the Peacemaker, who is just this like think like Homelander from The Boys, very kind of like a patriotic hero, but also just kind of
liberty is everything.
Yeah, liberty is everything, no matter what has to be sacrificed. And so there's him, and then there is King Shark, or Nanawe is his other name, and who else?
Polka Dot Man.
Polka Dot Man, yes. Polka Dot Man. Another, he's a Batman villain. He's one of the, like, really goofy Batman villains that was around in that era where a lot of the villains in Batman were weird. And he's just a man who could shoot these magical polka dots because he's got a virus that his mom gave him when she was trying to turn him into a superhero, and now he hates his mom and sees her in hallucinations in every person that he sees, and he finds it easier to kill when he sees someone as being his mom, which is an interesting little fact. He's a very weird character, but he's played well. I forget which, but yeah, so that's him. And yeah, so this is the team that we're actually going to pay attention to, which makes sense because initially, like I said, they're focusing on the first team, but I noted very quickly that most of these people were not in the trailers, so I was like, these probably aren't going to be our main characters because I don't think they're long for this world. And sure enough, they all died except for Harley, who made and Rick Flag. They both managed to escape, albeit separately. Rick Flag gets captured by these rebels that are fighting the government because they're basically, the mission is that they're going over to this South American government that's been taken over by an anti-American regime, presumably communist. They don't really get into it. There's Project Starfish, which is this secret government project that's being headlined by Peter Capaldi's character, which you recognize as Doctor Who. He plays the Thinker. And he is controlling this giant starfish thing called Starro, and mind control and everything. Like, so they're trying to kind of figure out, they're trying to shut that down and basically blow up the building where that's hidden. And so they go down to the South American island, and while the army is distracted by the first team killing all of them, Idris Elba's team manages to go on the thing and start their mission. And so Rick Flag gets captured by rebels who are fighting against the government, but they're friendly. And then Harley actually doesn't escape right away. She gets taken in, cut to custody by the government.
Bloodsport. I was a little bit worried when Bloodsport was coming. I thought he was just going to be a badass character, no emotion, no anything. But right away, he has this relationship that they wanted with Deadshot from the first movie. And it's a believable relationship about a criminal and a daughter, unlike the first movie where it was like, Dad, please, Batman, don't beat up my dad.
Yeah, they tried to humanize Deadshot with, he's got a daughter he cares about, but they just didn't do it very well. In this one, it's actually kind of the opposite, but it works. We've got Bloodsport. They bring his daughter. She's a teenager, and they have a very antagonistic relationship, where she's mad that he left her and her mom. Basically, her mom's presumably dead. She says that she's gone. So, she's a rebellious teenager acting out because her father's in prison and her mother's dead. And she gets caught for stealing, and so they're like yelling at each other in the visiting room or whatever. But she reveals the reason she was in the door, was even talking to him, is because Amanda Waller had said that maybe her dad could help her with her sentence because her court date was coming up for she stole like a watch or something.
Yep.
And so he goes back because this whole time Waller's trying to get him to join the squad and he keeps saying no. And so he's like, "What are you talking about threatening my daughter?" She's like, "Oh, well, in Louisiana she's 16, so we could put her in like we could put her in this prison, and she could be in a lot of danger because she's just a kid, and there's a lot of very dangerous criminals in here." And so basically she uses that to force him to fight for the Suicide Squad, because as much as he doesn't want the responsibility of the kid, he does still care about his daughter, and he doesn't want her to get hurt. And that's the only reason he agrees to lead this second team.
Yeah. And so right away, unlike the first movie, they actually have a reason for a character to be there, unlike they just wanted them there.
Yeah, like they're just, and all of the characters really have an emotional core. Like, just about all of them have a moment where they kind of talk about their family history or whatever, and where it humanizes them a little bit, which is really pleasant to see. Even King Shark has a moment where he's like admits that he doesn't have any friends, and Ratcatcher, who is definitely the emotional heart of the movie, she's the sweetest character that kind of ties it. And so all of that is something. So all of these characters, unlike the first movie where they just didn't have hardly any chemistry, they have exactly one scene in the first movie towards the end of it where they kind of bond in the bar, and that's like it. But in this movie, from the very beginning, you start to see the connections, and as the time goes on, there's scenes where they just they seem like a group of friends. They have a lot of chemistry together. Like there's this great scene where they're infiltrating a bar because they're trying to find the Thinker guy and kidnap him so that he will let them into the secret lab. And while they're waiting for him to show up, they decide to have some drinks and have some fun. They start dancing and just having a good time, and they're all just enjoying each other's company. And eventually they half of the team escapes with the Thinker, the other half gets arrested by this government.
I also want to give shout out to Rick Flag. In the first movie, he was just a wood plank that had no emotions. In this movie, he actually shows that he cares about the squad members and actually cares about Harley and cares about everyone on the team, and he feels like an actual character and not just a generic soldier person.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that they tried to do the whole, like, well, Rick Flag loves June Moon, but there's no evidence of that. We don't see anything to evidence that at all. In this game, they don't even mention June Moon. They break up or something, I have no idea. They don't even mention her. But he's a much more well-rounded character. Joel Kinnaman does a great job acting-wise. He does phenomenal. He does so well. And he's a much more likable sort of character. And yeah, he shows that he has a genuine sort of care. Like, as soon as they break out of the from being arrested from the bar, of course, it's him and John Cena's character and Idris Elba's character. They all break out because they're like super strong and intelligent. And they manage to reconvene with the other group. And they're like, okay, we got to go to Jotunheim, which is where the lab is. And then it is Rick Flag who says, nope, first we got to save Harley, because at this point Harley's been kidnapped and tortured by the Corto Maltese. And so she's kidnapped and she's taken prisoner. Initially, she is dressed up real pretty and she's presented to the new president, the general who's become president, and they start sort of flirting and having this nice little night out or whatever. And Harley's really into it at first because she's like, oh, I'm a princess, like in this big castle and hanging out with this handsome guy, and they really connect, and he asks her to marry him and she agrees, and they have sex, and it's like a grand old time. And then she realizes that he is going to be a very authoritarian leader, and he's going to be sent, because up until this point there had been like kind of a Romanov style family that had been controlling the island until they were all executed, including their children, and taken over by the military. And so but before that they had been sending their political enemies to the lab so experiments could be run on them. And so he begins to comment about how now he's going to do that same thing, basically. And Harley immediately murders him. And she says, I've had a lot of bad luck with men, and I've just told myself that next time my boyfriend said something that was a red flag, I would just kill him so that he wouldn't be able to do any more harm. And I was like, all right. So we kind of, get that. She never really directly mentions the Joker, but we get that reference to their previous relationship. And she ends up getting kidnapped and tortured for information. And so that's why the team goes back to rescue her, but Harley is a badass. And so my favorite scene in the fucking movie, best scene in the movie, is when she breaks out. So basically she's hung by her wrist on these chains in this basement and being tortured. And at one point she falls unconscious because they're tasing her or whatever. And so one of the general leaves, and his henchman is just kind of sitting there texting on his phone, and you see Harley wake up, and you're like, oh, and she grabs him with her legs and snaps his neck, and then grabs the keys with her toes and unlocks herself, and then grabs a couple of guns and some boots, and then opens the door, and there's this amazing sequence where she's just casually murdering all the guards, and there's flowers and stuff. And this is the scene to remind you, they're like, oh yeah, Harley's criminally insane. Harley's not just some quirky little mobster's girlfriend. She's a crazy person, because she's going through here and just murdering, slashing necks, just just destroying these people effortlessly. And the whole time, whenever there's blood shooting out of their bodies, and she sees it as flowers, and she's just la 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 la, and she's just murdering everyone. And she manages to get out, and then she comes across the team that's getting ready to break into the building to free her, and she's like, oh my gosh, you guys are going to save me, that's so sweet. But she had managed to do it. It's the best scene. Margot Robbie is a gift. That whole thing was incredible.
It really was. I just loved how it was shot. It was pretty much that whole hallway was pretty much a one shot.
Yeah, it was a one shot, just following her down the hallway, and she just stabs this guy and slashes this guy's neck and breaks this guy's neck with her dress. One point she rips part of her dress off and breaks this guy's neck with it, and then it's so creative. She's does all this hand-to-hand combat. They really let Harley shine, because in the first movie, Harley doesn't do anything.
No.
And it's why is this skinny girl with a baseball bat here? She's not doing anything. They give her a gun at one point. She's not even an expert marksman. She doesn't do anything.
Nope.
But in this one, it reminds us that comic book Harley is an acrobat. She's extremely flexible, and she's extremely gifted at hand-to-hand combat. And they actually let her do those things.
Yep.
And so it's just so great to watch.
That's what I have to say for every character. Every character that has powers, they allow them to do them. Not in the first movie with Killer Croc, where he just swam underwater for a couple seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. For Polka Dot Man, he uses his polka dot. for John Cena's character and Bloodsport, they're both expert marksmen at killing people. They use that. Rick Flag is pretty much a good leader, and he uses that.
Yeah, all of them have very very honed abilities, and they managed to make even ridiculous sounding powers like Polka Dot Man work, because it's like he has these literally just shoots polka dots at people. They even make a joke about it in the movie, but I mean they're deadly. He can like blow people up with them, and so all of the characters, even the goofy ones, manage to have a moment where they really shine and where they really show off that their abilities, and it just feels so much like a comic book. I mean, like a lot of these comic book movies don't necessarily feel like comic books, they feel like action movies, which is fine, but like I would even say a lot of the Marvel movies don't really feel like the books, they're just action movies. But this genuinely just felt like a comic book come to life. This was straight comic book violence and comic book like abilities and comic book behavior, like just all of the stuff that you would expect to see in a comic was there, and it was really great, and I really enjoyed it. And there's just so many scenes, and then so toward the end, the big climax is basically they managed to break into the lab or whatever, where they discovered that apparently Waller didn't actually send them to stop the mad scientist from creating the giant starfish thing. She sent them to destroy the evidence that the U.S. government was actually the people behind it the whole time, because they act like, oh no, that was just the South American government doing that thing, but it was really the U.S. had paid them under the table to do it. And so there's a big government secret, and they don't want it to, well, Amanda Waller and the American government does not want that to get out. So she actually had commissioned Peacemaker, John Cena's character. The reason she sent him on the mission was because she wanted to make sure, he was going to make sure that was destroyed.
Yeah, basically because he believes nothing but following the mission and liberty and protecting everyone for peace, no matter
he's very
what's it costs.
Lawful evil. Like he's willing to do. I mean, he literally has a line that's played like a joke where he's like, I don't care how many men, women, and children I have to murder to maintain peace. Yeah. But that's really what he is. Like he really does not care the kind of violence and atrocity he has to commit in order to maintain order. And so, meanwhile, Rick Flag's character is more noble. He's more nobility driven. Like, no, he's like, this is wrong. Like, we can't just keep this a secret. We have to tell the press. We have to tell everyone. And so him and Peacemaker are at odds, and they start to fight, and then the building collapses because they previously had set up a bunch of bombs on every level. And so they end up fighting over the hard drive where all the information is on. And it's a pretty close fight. You know, they both are about evenly matched. And it looks like Rick Flag is going to win because he's like choking out Peacemaker, but Peacemaker manages to grab a shard of porcelain from the toilet that they had just smashed, and he stabs it in his heart. And they actually like show his heart and show how the piece went cut into his heart and he's bleeding out and everything. And it's really like gut wrenching because at this point you really care about Rick. Like in the last movie, I wouldn't have given one care if he hadn't been killed, but in this one, it's like, oh damn, I liked Rick. He was a good guy.
Because they show the work in this movie. They show that he cares about the team, cares about Harley, and
cares about doing the right thing by people and stuff like that. Yeah, and so he's like, oh, so he dies, and his last words are "Peacemaker." What a joke! And again, this is where John Cena really shines. Like I didn't expect John Cena to be our twist villain, and like he manages to convey this sort of mixture of like determination and like guilt and sadness, because like you can tell he does care on some level about the team, but not enough to not murder them, but he doesn't love doing it. And so when he before they fight, he like really tries to get Flag to just hand it over so he doesn't have to do anything. And when they fight, he ends up killing him, and you can tell that he sort of regrets it. And then he looks up, and turns out Ratcatcher saw the whole thing because she had come out from another place in the rubble. And so she grabs the drive and starts running off, and he chases her and knocks her down and steals her rat thing so that she can't call the rats to save her. And he's about to shoot her to make sure that she doesn't say anything. And at that same time, Bloodsport shows up, and it's really cool because they flash back to where like how it happened. The way that it happened, and he ends up like falling down the collapsed building, and they film to like, okay, how could a regular human like Bloodsport survive this entire building pancaking? And it literally shows him like dropping down floor by like dropping and stopping and dropping and stopping and dropping and stopping, which I guess theoretically, if you were able to keep your perfect balance, you could survive that if nothing fell on you the whole time. unlikely, but theoretically, in terms of force, I think it would be possible. And so he manages to drop into the scene right as Peacemaker's about to shoot Ratcatcher, and they both fire their bullets. And what happens?
Pretty much, like, in the beginning of the movie, Peacemaker was like, oh, I do your job better because I have smaller bullets than you.
And so he can shoot, like, in between, or, like, he could, if Bloodsport were to shoot holes in something, then Peacemaker could shoot holes in those holes without touching them.
And basically, we find out Peacemaker's either lying or Bloodsport, once he heard that, he was like, okay, I'm going to make smaller bullets now. And he made a small enough bullet to go through Peacemaker's bullet and just shoot John Cena's character right in the neck, basically.
Mm-hmm. And so that's a great callback, and they managed to get out. And then the final battle begins because Starro has broken out, and he's destroying the town, and he's taken over a bunch of people and made them his like rope puppets because he lets a bunch of little starfish out of his armpits, and then like they capture everyone's faces and basically turn them into a hive mind. And so he's controlling them and trying to take over the city. And so they're on the radio with Waller, and Waller's like, well, hey, as long as you've got the secret information, it doesn't matter. Like, let them die. Like, just come back home. Who cares if this starfish is destroying the whole city? And they initially are going to go back, and then Bloodsport, who the whole discussion this entire time has been like, is there any good left in Bloodsport? He insists that there isn't, that he's completely, just out of empathy and he doesn't care about anyone, but he says, like he just decides he doesn't care of what is going to happen to him. He's going to go and try to help. And all of the rest of the team follow him. And so Waller is like screaming at them, and she's like, so I'm going to blow you all up or whatever. And then her team, because she's got like a bunch of employees who are working with her, finally stick. Because the whole time they're kind of like, she's doing stuff, and the whole time they're kind of like, Miss Waller, is that kind of like, are you going to do that? That's sort of evil. And they finally stand up to her, and one of her employees knocks her out with a golf club, and they remotely help the Suicide Squad with their mission of fighting the starfish. And then the final battle scene is really cool. It's got a lot of action, running around, all the characters using their strengths. And then we get to the most beautiful scene in the movie, and this cuts back to what I'm saying about like the cinematography and everything, and the score. The score is also brilliant. The music is used very well in this. Instead of a stupid pop song every 5 seconds, we have songs. There are some pop songs, but they fit the scene,
fit them.
And they are supposed to be there, and it's not excessive. And there's also just some beautiful orchestral score. And so there's scene where Ratcatcher is calling all of the rats in the city, millions of rats, to come and fight the starfish. And meanwhile, Harley has a javelin, because that was given to her by Javelin at the end of, or the first scene. And she jumps off the building and, like, stabs it in the eye and goes into the eyeball. And she's floating around in the fluid, and all of the rats go in and start chewing his insides up. And there's, and so Harley's, floating in the water and, looking around, and there's all these rats and blood. And you would think that's just objectively disgusting, but it's one of the most beautifully shot scenes in the movie.
Really
I don't know how they managed to make that as pretty as it was, but it was her floating in bloody water with rats was gorgeous. And then they flash back to Ratcatcher thinking about her father, and this is where Taika Waititi says his one line. He's just a cameo performance. He literally has one line in the entire movie, and it's about she is asking, because basically he was a drug addict, and he and his daughter grew up homeless on the streets of Portugal. Yeah. And so she's sitting, but he taught her how to, he was a science genius. He taught her how to control the rats. And so she asked him as a little girl why, he's so into rats, or why do they choose rats? And he says, well, rats are the lowliest and most despised of all creatures, and if they have purpose, then so do we all. And I'm sitting there crying, we were both crying. Yeah. I'm sitting there, I cannot believe that I am watching a scene where millions of rats chew a giant starfish to death from the inside out, and there's blood everywhere, and I'm crying like a baby. What is going on here? It is the most, emotional. It's so emotional. Yeah. This movie made me laugh and cry so much.
We're wrapping near the end of the movie. I just want to say I have not wanted to see a DC movie again in theaters since Dark Knight. This was the only movie I wanted to see again immediately.
Yeah, like we paid to see it 2 times. Like we didn't even, because it's on HBO Max.
Yeah.
But I really, don't get me started on, I don't think it's wise for them to have released, because I don't think they should have released it on HBO Max on the same day, because it really cut into their profits, and they're not making back what they projected to make. Even though, like, under normal circumstances, pre-COVID, if this had just been a theater release, I think this would have been a smash hit.
Yeah.
And, like, easily made their budget in, like, the first weekend. But because so many people could watch it for free at home, it's like, no, people weren't going out to the theaters.
Yeah.
And I think they should have done that. But anyway, they should either charge something to watch it on HBO or not put it on HBO Max until, like, a couple weeks had gone by. Yeah, but anyway, but this movie was like we went to see it in theaters 2 different times because it was that good. And and I said before, and I stand by it, I think it's the best superhero movie I've seen since Endgame. And I never thought I'd say that about a DC property, but it's really that good.
And I enjoy the shit out of Marvel, but out of like the upcoming movies like Shang-Chi, Eternals, Spider-Man No Way Home, they have to live up to this. Like, this is the first time I'm saying Marvel has to live up to DC.
I know. I mean, yeah, and that's the thing, because, you know, the whole, like, Marvel versus DC argument is so stupid, but everyone talks about, like some of the diehard Snyder bros were like, oh, this movie isn't good, it's too much like Marvel, I hate James Gunn, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, it's not Marvel. It is definitely more lighthearted and funny than a lot of the DC movies, but that doesn't mean it's Marvel-y. It still feels DC. Marvel would never do something like this with their main characters. I defy you. Do you think Marvel would ever do like a Captain America movie that was this bloody? They would never do that in a million years. So it's still very DC.
That's why I'm worried about Deadpool. I really don't think Deadpool 3 is going to be rated R. I don't think Disney will allow it.
Oh yeah, because Disney's taken over the Deadpool frame. Yeah, and which is so stupid because Deadpool was such a success in part because it was rated R. You cannot have a Deadpool movie that's rated PG-13.
No,
it's not a thing that can happen in the same way that you can have a Suicide Squad movie that's rated PG-13. Like, some stuff cannot be adapted without being rated R. I firmly believe that. Like, if you're going to show the blood and guts and gore and all of that kind of stuff and make it feel gritty and real, and I'm not saying it has to feel overly, like, depressing, because that's the whole thing. The DC confuses dark with, like, having a point. It still needs to have a point. You don't need to just have nothing but death and destruction and depression. But if you want to have a certain effect, it's gonna have to be rated R.
Yeah.
A Deadpool movie is not gonna work with no blood, and neither with this movie.
So, do you want to give final reviews or like ratings or?
Sure, I will. But before I get into that, I will say a couple of just notes on like the future of the franchise. So James Gunn has confirmed that. Post credit sequence. There are 2 post credit sequences. One is when we find out Weasel is still alive, so that's interesting. And 2 is when we find out that John Cena's character Peacemaker is still alive. He actually managed to survive the being shot by Bloodsport. And so hello. Our camera's battery died in the middle of recording, so we're doing the rest of this on my phone. Anyway, but as I was saying, it's confirmed that James Gunn has written an original series for HBO Max that is going to revolve around Peacemaker, and John Cena is going to be in it for at least 1 season. So they're doing kind of the Disney Plus thing and tying in a TV show to the series, which is new because before, all of their TV shows had nothing to do with the DCEU. And so this is a really interesting new direction they're going. And James Gunn has also confirmed that he wants to do more big screen, like he's in talks, I guess, to do more big screen stuff with DC. He wants to do more with the villain characters. He says he's not done. He wants to do more stuff with villains in the Marvel universe. So I'm looking forward to seeing the DC universe.
And you agree that he should be a good fit for Gotham City Sirens?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. He was originally going to direct that. That was what he was going to be brought on to direct, and then some conflicts and stuff happened with that. But he could do Gotham City Sirens, which is with Harley and Catwoman and Poison Ivy, or a lot of other options. But love the James Gunn writing. It's just great. There's going to be that, and also Margot Robbie has said that she would be willing to reprise the Harley character, and she's especially interested in reprising it with Poison Ivy. Yep. So we could get a big screen iteration of Poison Ivy, which hasn't happened in quite some time, and that could be really neat.
Yep. Anything will be better than whatever we got from Batman and Robin.
We don't speak of it. But yeah, my fun fact, my dad, I think, watched Batman and Robin. I think he was on his like honeymoon or something. He mentioned that he had seen it, like it was in the hotel or whatever. He said that he's not watched a Batman movie since then. I don't think he's even seen The Dark Knight. He's like, I saw that movie and it was so awful. I was like, I'm never watching a Batman movie again.
I can't blame him. It is like one of the worst movies out there.
He's like, yeah. So I'm like, I got to get him to watch at least The Dark Knight. That's at least worth watching. But yeah, he's sworn off Batman since that movie. But yeah, anyway. So, but ratings. You want to give? What's your rating?
Honestly, I think 10 out of 10. I think this is one of my favorite DC movies since Dark Knight, and I gave that movie a 10 out of 10. So,
I think I would have to agree. I mean, I only had a handful of gripes with it, and I'm pretty critical. One of my gripes is that sometimes Amanda Waller speaks in exposition, which is almost funny, but like it's not how people talk. Like there's a scene where she's calling Bloodsport to tell. I keep wanting to call him Deadshot. Bloodsport to tell him that they need to go rescue Flag. And he's like, Flag? And she's like, yes, I know you guys worked together in like this war, this thing that happened this other time. He's actually the one who recommended you for the squad. And I'm like, that's not how people do. Like if I called you and mentioned somebody that you knew, like I said, like Sarah's gonna be there, and you said Sarah, and I was like, yeah, Sarah, you met her in 4th grade in Miss Smith's algebra class. I know that you guys had met at that time when you were in marching band together, and she's actually the one. Like no one talks like that.
No one. Thank you for talking to me like I had to mention.
Like I had to explain to you how you know this person. You know how you know this person. Like that's not how people talk. But that's clearly for the audience's sake and not for his sake. But that's just minor. And not nearly as bad as like the first movie, where all of her lines were just exposition. And Viola Davis, by the way, does an incredible job. I didn't talk about her very much in this review, but she kills Amanda Waller's character. She absolutely nails it. And she might as well have just jumped right out of the comic books, even just like physically looks exactly like Amanda Waller in the comics. And yeah, just great. And so, but yeah, they give her some good lines. Sometimes she's just like, this is a thing, and it blah, 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 blah. All right, cool. That's not how people talk, but whatever. But yeah, I would also say 10 out of 10. It's really, really great. It's a really great movie. It's so, like I said, we watched it twice. And the last time I paid to watch something twice was like Endgame, I guess. And before that, it was Black Panther. So yeah, it doesn't happen often. But yeah, please go see this movie so that they will make their money and make more, because like DCU could actually do something good for once. Let's keep it going.
And one more thing, just like a quick update for the YouTube channel and Twitch. YouTube channel, we got a new art, and I want to thank Aaron for reaching out and getting that. And also, if you guys don't know, we have a Twitch, and the Twitch should have on the bottom of the description, there should be a link linking to the Twitch if you want to go check us out.
Yes, we play a lot of video games on there. We usually stream about 3 times a week.
Yeah.
So yeah, you should definitely go check us out. And that's about it we got. So we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.